Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is DKL, and today I have a FNAF theory. I know, it's weird. I'm jumping into the wild world of Five Nights at Freddy's theorizing. It's crazy. But I think I've got a pretty big one, actually. And if I'm right, I'm going to be so happy. I already perfectly guessed what Ruin was going to be about in a live stream the day before the trailer came out. So, if that's what I have to work with, I think this may have some credibility. But I don't know. That'll be up to you guys. And Scott Cawthon and Steelwool Studios to prove me wrong. Which they probably will. But either way, I think I've got a pretty big theory, and I think there's some good evidence for it as well. Before I jump into it, I am both off script, I don't have a script is what I mean, and I'm also just getting over an allergic reaction that I had to my cat. So if I'm sniffly and if I seem disorganized, that is why. But this is also like my 6th or 7th time. My 6th or 7th time trying to record this. Various things would go wrong with all the other times. I almost said trimes again. Anyway, that's not important. What's important is I really need you to bear with me, even if I seem disorganized, like the last 30 seconds. And if I'm sniffly because of my allergic reaction, I just really need to get this out because this is big and I don't want to forget about it. Because that's entirely possible. Anyway, let's get right into it. Lately, Five Nights at Freddy's fans have been talking about this thing called the Mimic. The Mimic has been showing up in these books, the Tales from the Pizzaplex. And I specifically hold up these ones because this one has the storyteller and this one has the story called the Mimic. It's mainly been in the epilogues, but I'll do a rundown of the story of the Mimic. Try to keep it as short as possible. The Mimic was built by this man named Edwin Murray to entertain his son while he worked on projects for Fazbear Entertainment. The Mimic was created so that it could learn things just by seeing them. So things that it learns are a gesture that it would use to ask for ice cream. It would learn to hold a tiger plush. It would learn to draw. It could play catch. It was great. It ran this program called Mimic 1, which is where it got its name from. And everything was great until one day, Edwin's son David wanted to play with Edwin rather than the Mimic. It asked Edwin to play catch with... Did I say it? David asked Edwin to play catch with him and ran outside. Edwin wasn't entirely awake at the time and didn't really absorb what David was saying to him. So he just went about his daily routine of getting up, getting ready, and making breakfast. By the way, they live in a factory. That's going to be important later. While Edwin is doing these things, he looks outside and sees that David had dropped the ball, literally, and it was rolling into the street. And while Edwin looked on in horror, unable to do anything, David ran into the street after the ball and got hit by a car. And died. For 2 weeks, Edwin was in a state of shock and grief, as anybody could understand after losing a child. And then as he comes out of that, he works on a project for Fazbear Entertainment, and in a fit of rage, attacks the Mimic, which was just trying to ask for ice cream. A little bit later, some Fazbear employees come and they're told to just fix something. They're not told what they're supposed to do, but they find out that they were the second team and the first team was killed. By what? Well, they'd found this endoskeleton that looked really advanced, so they decided to try and fix it up. Worst mistake of their lives. Anyway, this team was also killed by the Mimic, and It was horrific. It used various mascot costumes, like a clown, and killed all three of them. Over at the Pizzaplex, the CEO of Fazbear Entertainment, Mr. Burrows, wanted to fire all of the creative team employees because paying them is costing too much. So instead, he wants to use an AI. So he has this tree built in the middle of the atrium of the Pizzaplex, and it was called the Storyteller. Nobody was allowed to go inside the Storyteller, and which was probably fine, except for the fact that the animatronics started acting weird. Almost childlike. Freddy even played tug of war with a little kid because he wanted the toy that the kid had. There's a little bit more to it than that, but that's the basic summary of that particular part of the story. So Edwin, not really liking this tree, especially with the way that it's making the animatronics behave, he goes inside the tree and finds an animatronic torso and head of a white tiger, which looked exactly like the tiger plush that David would carry around. Yeah, the resemblance was uncanny. David decided that... Oh, also David found that it was running the Mimic 1 program that the original Mimic was using. So that's pretty important. So Edwin kept going into the tree to work on it and try to fix things. Well, Mr. Burrows caught on to that and sealed him inside the tree, and then went into the tree to check on him, and the tree was sealed and there was no oxygen. But before he suffocated, he found Edwin's body and a lot of paper that had strange markings on them, along with the words, "I'm sorry." Yeah, it was pretty tragic. So now we get to the epilogues. In the epilogues, six teenagers break into the still under construction Pizzaplex, specifically the pizzeria underneath, where they find the Mimic. Now, before they broke in, there was employees there who were supposed to take apart endoskeletons and put them into piles. They got a shipment of animatronics, and one of those animatronics was this weird endoskeleton that had kind of rabbit ears, and it looked kind of burnt. Oh well, it's probably fine. They program a directive into it because one of them is really good with computers. He programs a directive into it to take apart the endoskeletons and put the pieces in piles. Unfortunately, something that we learned in the very first game is that it's entirely possible for an animatronic to mistake a person for an endoskeleton. And let's just say the Mimic does that. So these teenagers that break into the pizzeria, they are trapped there with it. There is no way out. I mean, they got in, but I don't remember what happened, but they can't get out that way. It's probably too high up or something. And they try various things. One of them goes through the ventilation before the fan turns on and slices him in half. It's brutal. These Tales from the Pizzaplex books are brutal. Definitely a step up from Fazbear Frights. It's great. The Haps story kind of follows that of a slasher movie. It's really cool. And disturbing. A lot of these stories are pretty disturbing. But that's not what's important. The Mimic. This is where the Mimic is at this point. There's still the Tiger Rock book that hasn't come out yet at the time of this recording. We're still a month away. But we'll see what that has to bring to the table. So, what does this all have to do with the games? Well, I'd like to argue that the Mimic is there. And people have already it's theorized that the Mimic's there and that the Mimic is actually Burn Trap. But I don't like that. In all honesty, I want that to be Afton. If they're going to bring Afton back again, it better be actually Afton. Other people say that the Mimic 1 program is just Glitch Trap, which, sure, maybe. But I'd prefer Glitch Trap being Glitch Trap and not Mimic. So let's just go with those ideas. Now, there's no denying that Henry and Edwin have a connection. I mean, they're basically the same character, just without the murderous partner. And Edwin wasn't ever the owner of Fazbear Entertainment, but that's beyond the point. It's not relevant right now. They are both great roboticists who made the robots for Fazbear Entertainment and lost a child. And they both used robotics to entertain that child before their death. I mean, I imagine. So something that was never brought up in the games but was in the books is that after Charlie died, Henry rebuilt her as robots. 4 different versions. One as a little kid, one as a slightly older kid, one as a teenager, and one as an adult. The adult one having been stolen by Afton, possessed by Elizabeth, and became Circus Baby. It's weird, but all of FNAF is at this point, so just bear with me. That was never really brought up in the games. And while MatPat keeps trying to tell us, there's robot kids, there's the crying child, there's Gregory, let's say that he's wrong. Now, I believe it's completely, entirely possible that Gregory is a robot. It's entirely possible because it would kind of explain the post-it room. It would kind of explain why he's there in the first place. It makes sense. But for the sake of this, let's ignore that. Let's ignore Gregory being a robot. Whether it's true or not, let's just ignore it because it's not important right now. What's important is that up to this point, there haven't been any robot kids, despite it being introduced in the novel trilogy and then reiterated a few times in the Fazbear Frights books, which were used to lead up to Security Breach. And yet, there aren't any robot kids in the games anywhere. And you can argue, oh, Afton said he was going to put the crying child back together. And he probably did that. Except for the fact that there's no evidence that he did that. And even then, the whole child being rebuilt as a robot was not something that Afton did in the books. It was Henry. So here's my argument. Henry, in his grief over Charlie's death, decided he was going to put her back together. He was going to rebuild her as a robot. And this robot would be able to learn. He needed a program to run it, so he developed Mimic 1. Maybe he called it something else, I don't know. Maybe he called it Charlie Bot. Who knows? But what's important is that he decided eventually that this wasn't right. He does come to this realization in the books, but much later. For our purposes, he's going to decide this a bit earlier than having built 4. He's only built 1. And he's kind of left it alone. Probably locked it away like he did with Elizabeth. So years go by, and the Pizzeria Sim fire happens, and Henry dies. Probably. I don't know. Nobody else is gone that was in that fire, so who knows? Maybe he'll come back. But what's important is that Henry is not around anymore. And so whoever takes over Fazbear Entertainment It's not really important who it is for this argument, but whoever it is, they decide to look through some of Henry's old projects that were left in his workshop. And they find this endoskeleton with really advanced programming. Decided to take it back to the Pizzaplex to study it, see how it works, and then mass produce it. In Security Breach, there's this whole section in the parts and service area of the Pizzaplex where you're chased by these endoskeletons, and throughout the area there are these walls that show endoskeletons and checks and X's as if they're saying do this and don't do this. It's entirely possible that those aren't just decorations. What if they're actually trying to teach the mimics things that they should and should not do? I just realized that today, that those X's and check marks were there. I'd already been kind of thinking, oh, these endoskeletons kind of resemble a mimic. I mean, minus the rabbit ears, but Vanny kind of adds those on the pictures in parts and service. Also, on the note of parts and service comes a really big thing. There are 5 endoskeletons in parts and service that are just hanging around, with one more kind of twitching off to the side. And Rytoast's Twitch chat theorized that this could be Morse code. And if it is, it either spells out the word no, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, or it spells out AI. And this twitching endoskeleton that's off to the side in front of them has silver eyes. I thought about that and lost my mind. So that's my theory, is that the endoskeletons are mimics. Whether or not they are being used by the Glamrock animatronics, I don't know. It's possible, sure, but I don't think so. Because while the Glamrock animatronics are simply just taken over by a glitch trap, the animatronics the endoskeletons in parts of service need to be taught. And so Vanny kind of edited some of those images that are over there. And also that area is blocked off. The only way you get in there is through a vent. So what if something happened with those endoskeletons? They are thrown into that section of the Pizzaplex, locked in, you can't go there. Because I believe that there's a shutter that you could go through there, but I believe that shutter is out of order, which is kind of in line with something that Fazbear Entertainment would do when something is dangerous and needs to be kept hidden. I mean, they locked William Afton behind a wall for 30 years. Excuse me. So, that's my theory. People like to say that, oh, Burn Trap is a mimic. Burn Trap is the mimic that's in Security Breach. And, yeah, I see the evidence. I just don't like it. I want Afton to be Afton. I don't want Afton to be Afton being controlled by Glitch Trap or a robot that is learning to be Afton. And besides, it's way too organic to just be a robot. I mean, it's got his decaying face. It's not the Mimic. And if it's the Mimic program, I just don't think that holds up. If the Mimic program is just controlling Afton. And it being Glitch Trap controlling him, I guess. I mean, he has the glowing purple eyes that could kind of indicate Glitch Trap's influence. I just don't like that. It's possible, I just don't like it. And I think people are saying that Glitch Trap could be the game version of the Mimic 1 program that's causing a ruckus. Maybe. I don't know. That's all I have to say about that one. But let me know what you think about this theory about the endoskeletons being mimics. One other thing that I want to bring up is the channel FNAF has theorized that Vanny used these endoskeletons to eliminate all of the nighttime workers. I mean, the staff program was perfectly fine, and Vanny wanted to be alone now. So she taught these mimics that could learn and have had a history of violence to dismiss the workers. And she didn't really clean up after herself. I mean, that area is still a mess. Now, why there are mimics in the theater at the daycare, I have no idea. That one's just weird. But then there's also a mimic. There are two mimics in front of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. And I don't really have an answer for those being there either. I mean, Freddy did say that she, probably talking about Vanessa, used him to excavate the area so that she could get in and out of the pizzeria. And she probably used these mimics as well. That's my idea. But I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I guess I'll wrap this up now. So, goodbye.